What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Rough Drafts, where I go deep each week on specific topics in the current limited format. My name is Sam Pratt. This week, we are saying goodbye to Edge of Eternities, and I have a lot of topics that I want to get to, so we're going to jump right in, starting with doing a small amount of gushing about Spacecraft. When the full set had been previewed before we had actually played with the cards, Spacecraft as a mechanic garnered a lot of skepticism. The station thresholds were bafflingly high. Like, how are you ever going to have enough time and power on the board to get your pinnacle kill shift up to 7 or something up to 8 or 9 counters? And, you know, as it often happens with the flagship mechanics in a set, the mechanic just worked. And it really felt like Edge of Eternities was defined by the Spacecraft mechanic. So kudos to WotC for creating a legitimately difficult to evaluate mechanic. Basically, everyone was low on the mechanic coming in, with kind of like cautious optimism being like, you know, there's no way that this mechanic can fail because it's so central to the set, or like if this mechanic does fail, the set's kind of ruined. The mechanic was totally fine. It took me weeks to really figure out how Spacecraft played, how to maximize them, how to punish my opponent's Spacecraft. I was really caught up on needing board presence to enable my own Spacecraft and trying to eliminate my opponent's board presence. And it really didn't click with me until I internalized that it's not just about board presence, it's also about life total. I thought that Spacecraft were really difficult to play with. They were interesting to deck build with, and they were also very interesting and difficult to play against. Overall, I thought the Spacecraft mechanic had really good gameplay, and I thought the set overall had really good gameplay. I think that's one big positive of the set was I found the games very tricky to navigate. I had a lot of decisions of whether I want to attack, hold back a blocker, do I want to station this turn, do I want to like leave my Spacecraft unstationed with like X-1 counters on it to save it from like a sorcery speed removal spell. Overall, I think this was just a good limited mechanic, and I would be very happy to see it come back. We've had a lot of recent sets based around these like kind of big artifact types with job select in Final Fantasy and vehicles in Aether Drift. So definitely want like a break from that type of thing where a lot of what's going on is you want things with Enter's abilities on these artifacts. I think we're going to get a break for the next couple sets, which is good. But yeah, I'm definitely waiting for the next Spacecraft set. I also think the scale of the spaceships, like how they were just enormous flyers pretty much across the board, was also a pretty huge flavor win. For the space sets. It really did feel like it was like, say, space battles, which was also a huge win for the set as well. All right, the next topic I want to talk about is evaluating the slump that I was in the first couple of weeks. So if you missed my week 2 episode of this format, I was in a really bad slump. My win rate was really poor, and it took a while for me to come out of it. One was just I had the wrong evaluation of how to play with Spacecraft, but in terms of deck building, I kept feeling like I was doing things right and still losing. I felt like I was drafting pretty good decks. I was navigating the drafts well, but my concept of right, quote unquote, drafting correctly was relative to the picture that the data painted of the format. Basically that green was the best color. And especially in the first couple days, green was like so far ahead of all the other colors. And I was trying really hard to get into green. Now, I think this is generally a pretty good strategy, but I didn't really have my own play experience informing how I should draft and play these decks. Like I was kind of throwing my hands up and saying, green is good, I got to get into green, without really thinking too hard about what is actually going into the green decks to make them strong, like what the good parts of green are. Like I think I thought I had a good concept of that based on internalizing a lot of the 17 lands data, but in practice, it's kind of like my heart just wasn't in drafting that way. I think I am at my best, and I think most people are at their best when they find a deck or a section of the format that really clicks with them. And I think for your own success in the format, you should be chasing that more than you should be trying to navigate into what you think you should be in. Like the 17 lands data paints this big overview of the format, but what you're actually going to succeed in is just a section of that. And the data is kind of just a reflection of the texture of the format. A big part of why I was kind of soft forcing green was I really wanted to draft gene pollinator decks. In week 1, I was very excited about gene pollinator. You know, that was my week 1 episode. I think I had a slightly flawed view of how these should look. I don't disagree with anything I put out week 1, but I just think I didn't really adjust to the format. And the other part was green's win rate was so good in the first week in the data that I was having a lot of FOMO of missing this free win equity that I would get by drafting the busted deck. So my takeaway is in week 1, when I don't glom onto something immediately, I don't immediately click with the deck, I should be less turning to the data as an overview of informing how I should be approaching drafts and more just keep searching for something that clicks with me. I'm still a huge data guy. I love the data. I think the individual card evaluations are the more important information for me. Something like how week 2, I found out that Sorceress's Schemes was doing really well in Final Fantasy. And that really clicked the red, blue, and red, black decks with me. I think the big picture overview that the data provides is a really good tool for players who are jumping in later to the format to get a sense of the color power rankings, what colors have a critical mass of good cards at common and uncommon. But I think early on, I need to make sure that I'm trusting my gut, sort of searching for what works for me more than trying to draft I feel like I should be drafting. All right, my next point. This is going to be a negative about this set. I do feel like there are more than a handful of cards that make me go why is this in the set? There are cards like this in every limited format, just a couple of cards that are out of place. But I actually feel like in Edge of Eternities, there are significantly more cards that are out of place. Part of that is 2 of the archetypes are just kind of really confusing. White Black was labeled Go Wide, and the uncommon Servandum was a really good card. But Black has literally no cards that make multiple bodies. And really the only Go Wide card in the entire format is basically the Trumpet Blast at common in white. And I understand that Wizards has to call the archetype something, because White Black is kind of just an aggro deck. But this was really confusing, and also to a greater extent, the Black-Green Graveyard deck was just not supported at all. Something like Pull Through the Weft is a really cool card, but just had literally no support. If we just had something like Wreckage Wickerfolk, a card that could surveil early, or mildew a couple cards, maybe an Aenoch Wayfarer, that card would be a lot better. Green-Black would definitely be a lot better. Something like I can't even remember the name, the 2-black, sack a creature, bring a creature back. These types of cards would be really cool. That's another card, Scrounge for Eternity. That it's a cool card, but it just doesn't work in this format. A couple other examples, the defensive combat tricks, Dark Endurance, what are we doing here with a defensive combat trick after they just changed the rules to make defensive combat tricks significantly worse? There's also Roving Actuator is a really cool card that would be really sweet in something like Final Fantasy where you had a bunch of cheap spells. Just doesn't work here. Bygone Colossus is so cute. That's the 9-mana 9/9. But we found out pretty easily, why are you playing this thing you can warp for 3 to give 9 counters on your Spacecraft when you can just play a Germinating Worm and get 5 for 2? That's basically the same thing. This even extends up to the rares, Infinite Guideline Station. Do we really need to give Commander players a 5-color Spacecraft for their Commander deck? I'm a big fan of 5-color payoffs in Draft. I think they can be really cool. This card just literally just doesn't work. Could we not have just given it a different ability that it would actually be a cool 5-color payoff in this set? I don't know. This set I think is good. I do think it's pretty rough around the edges in terms of individual cards, on the lower end. And I do wonder if this has to do with the fact that they had to scrap that giant card mechanic that they were planning to make. And had to pivot into something else later, that they had a little bit less development time to make sure that all the archetypes and cards were supported. All right, my last specific point. I want to check back in on play boosters. Edge of Eternities is the 10th play booster set. And I think there were some design changes that we've fully seen come to fruition. And I want to talk about that, specifically in terms of the shift between commons and uncommons. So if you're not familiar with this, in draft boosters, so anything before Murders at Karlov Manor, they would make 100 commons and 80 uncommons. With play boosters, we now have 100 uncommons per set and 80 commons per set. So more uncommons, and they also shifted the types of cards that go into each. The big result of this, in my opinion, is that drafts and archetypes are now more defined by uncommons than by commons. I think this is a pretty big shift, and I think one that we're kind of just figuring out. So if the uncommons are defining your drafts and sort of defining color strength, archetype strength, I think commons play a much more generic support role. Uncommons, for the most part, they just work. Like, either they're generically good, something like Codecracker Hound, which is just a very generically powerful card, or they're like more niche cards, something like Survey Mechan, which props up this specific thing, and it's really good at what it does. It's kind of easy to figure out what to do with the uncommons. Like, there'll be an uncommon that just obviously goes in one or two archetypes, etc. And I think this shift, the shift of the root of the draft to be more powerful, actually makes commons a lot more interesting to talk about. When I started this podcast, I would have bet money that at this point, I would have more episodes titled after uncommons than commons, but it's not even close. I have so many more episodes about looking at commons rather than uncommons. And while I think that the uncommons are the cards like putting you in certain colors, the uncommons having a critical mass of good uncommons in a color really pulls that color up, I think the commons are a really good lens to talk about that color or deck's game plan. So you can see just the episodes I put out this set. I had the red episode on Nebula Dragon. I think that was a very red defining common. Perigee Beckoner, how black really played a good like aggressive attrition role. And then something like Gene Pollinator, green wants to ramp and splash. It's really subtle, but I think this has flipped around from draft boosters. I think what I'm getting at is that the uncommons are kind of determining how powerful a certain color or deck is, and the commons are more outlining that deck's game plan. I really think of commons more in context of supporting the uncommons now, which I think that was the reverse in draft boosters. Like, I think in draft boosters, usually colors were determined by like how deep are its roster of commons. Does it have like really standout commons? What's its common removal look like? And then the uncommons were just kind of like these perks that you got during the draft for being in that color. I don't think that's the case anymore. And personally, in my opinion, I think this is a huge win for play boosters. I think printing more uncommons and centering the draft around these uncommons provides a lot more variety in terms of how each individual color or color pair plays out, because it's the more powerful cards that are variable. Your deck is built around the more powerful cards, and having more options in these powerful cards gives you more options of things to do in draft and deck building. Something like, for example, Hilderblade is a really good reward for going into an aggressive black deck. This is the type of card that if it was at common, it would be a lot less powerful and wouldn't be able to like really complement an aggressive black deck as well as it would be at uncommon. Like, this is a really niche card that's really juicy for a certain type of deck, and this lends itself to make that deck work at all. They're able to juice these more niche reward cards because they live at uncommon rather than at common like they used to. I really like the way that play boosters have played out in this respect. I've been kind of championing this from the beginning. I like playing with different powerful cards. I like having options during the draft and having my drafts play out differently because I'm someone that drafts a set at least 50 times a set. I think what we lose in this trade-off is consistency in how the archetypes play out, which in my opinion is a good thing, but other people might not like that what you play against is less consistent. It might be harder to master the set gameplay wise if you're playing against a more variety of decks. And I think this redistribution of importance of commons and uncommons also extends to rares, just because we get way more rares in play boosters than we did in draft boosters. And I think the trade-off is significantly more severe with the rares. You know, people don't like playing against busted rares, and just pound for pound with play boosters, you're going to see more busted rares. I do think that this should and has changed the way that we evaluate limited sets. I think the way, for example, that Lords of Limited shifted their Crash Course episode is really indicative of this. They used to do, as part of the Crash Course, top 3 commons of every color and then top 2 uncommons of every color. And what they shifted to was, here's just a list of commons that we think matter. And then we'll also give you the top 3 uncommons as well. So it's way more about the commons as role players when the actual meat of the set is at the uncommons. One last thing about play boosters, and this is a huge negative, I think the biggest negative. I want the 14th card back in the packs. I think that there was so much discussion and discourse about the fact that you could open a pack with 4 rares in it, that losing an entire card out of the pack kind of got swept under the rug. And I think that's actually a huge deal. And they did not get enough flack for this. Like, it's just so obviously a cost-cutting measure. And you could really feel it in a set like Edge of Eternities that doesn't have dual lands in the basic land slot. Like, it makes a really significant impact on the draft, because it's not just losing 3 cards in your pool at the end of the draft. You see 24 fewer cards throughout the course of the draft. So I really think that there wasn't enough backlash against 13 card packs. And that's like the one big negative thing I have about play boosters at this point. Looking back at Edge of Eternities, I think this is a good to great set, but not exceptional. Like, it's not an all-timer. I think it was pretty good. I would give it like a 7 out of 10. I think it had really good gameplay. It was very balanced. A couple negative things. Only 1 signpost per color pair. Felt like a step back for me. I really liked the change that came with play boosters of doing double cycle of uncommon signposts. I think that really rewards you for finding the right lane. And I also think it lends itself well to making each color pair draft differently, slightly differently, draft after draft. And I think because of this, there was like not a ton of cooking to be had. Like, black-red basically played like black-red draft after draft. And I know a lot of people like that. For me, being creative during the draft is a huge part of why I like limited, what keeps me drafting set after set. But overall, I think this set was good. I'd give it a 7 out of 10. Though I could see that in hindsight coming up. It feels kind of similar to Wilds of Eldraine, where I would give Wilds of Eldraine like an 8 out of 10, 8.5 out of 10. But I think it was kind of slept on at the time because it was following up March of the Machines and Lord of the Rings, which are 2 really popular sets. And Edge is following up Final Fantasy, which is one of the most like universally liked sets in the last couple of years. And I personally really liked Aetherdrift and Tarkir. So I could see it really deserving more than a 7 out of 10, but I think I like my 7 out of 10 rating for now. And that's going to wrap it up. I hope you enjoyed this retrospective. I'm going to be back next week. I will cover Spider-Man, or whatever it's going to be known as online. That whole thing's going to be pretty confusing. I'm still figuring it out. I do plan to cover Spider-Man for the my 10 hot topics episode. I'll definitely have an episode on it next week. And then I will probably have at least 1 normal episode on Spider-Man. And then I'm going to kind of mix it up and give some other types of content. It will be related to limited. I'm not going to exactly say what it is. You'll just have to wait and see. But I don't plan to cover Spider-Man for all 8 weeks that it's going to be the premier draft set. You'll just have to wait and see what I do. If you want to reach out to me, you can find me on Blue Sky at sampratt.bsky.social. You can message me on Discord at samp6. And I also stream occasionally at twitch.tv/samp_mtg. Thanks for listening. See you next week.